Alright, the question for today is what was the impact of the scientific revolution? Well, I had another video that really speaks on this, but specifically speak on the impact of the scientific revolution. Well, the scientific revolution is basically an exchange of ideas that provokes people to think completely differently than what they previously thought. In this example, you have individuals like Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, and Kepler looking around the universe they live in. They basically discovered, and many Europeans had discovered in the 1600s, that there were some translations of ancient Greek and Roman writings in the Middle East that were in Greek. They had many of the documents in Latin. They had translated those, but when they translated the documents from the Greek portion, they discovered there were some contradictory statements. And so they decided to discover and investigate these sorts of elements. Some of these elements were, of course, talking about Christianity or science, for example, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, and there were different varying opinions. And it's not just famous individuals that we all generally are familiar with. So these scientists, people like Newton, Copernicus, Kepler, and there are many more different scientists out there, were investigating these discrepancies. And so that's how they became scientists. And one of the questions was the center of the universe and how the planets align, and one way was to try predict how these planets aligned due to religious ceremonies and so on. Well, when looking into this, they discovered that some of the patterns of the planets or the stars and so on and so forth were different. And so through this investigation, they discovered that maybe these planets aren't actually revolving around Earth, but maybe revolving around something else. Now, Copernicus has this idea that he still stays with the fact that the planets revolve around the Earth, and he still believes in God and a Christian God and much of what the church believes, but he's trying to make the system that the church has simpler. Now, the church says that the Earth is the center of the universe and everything else revolves around it, and all the planets revolve in a circle since it is the more perfect form. And then all the planets are crystalline or diamond, and then the stars are basically heaven. Well, this is all very, very complicated if you look at a diagram of the solar system that they had created. And so Copernicus decided to try simplify this. But what in fact he found was that the revolutions may not exactly be around the Earth, and they're not exactly circular. And so he keeps with this basic idea, and he develops a system that's actually far more complicated than what the church has. But this is picked up by Kepler and Galileo. And what Kepler does is he basically comes up with this idea that it's more of an elliptical pattern, and he just basically charts where all these planets are and all these stars, and he figures out that it's probably more of an elliptical pattern rather than a circle. Then we have Galileo, who actually uses a telescope to look at the planets, and he figures out it's not a crystal or a diamond, and in fact these planets are moving around the sun, and the Earth is not the center of the universe. Then we take Newton, the last ingredient, and he comes up with a theory that based on gravity, planets will speed up or slow down. And so with him, we complete the picture of how the planets revolve around the sun. So what does all this mean? Well, what we have is basically the church has this idea. They've been telling everybody that this is how the universe is, this is how it works, and now these scientists, over the course of several decades, have discovered that that's not quite the case. That the planets are made of rock, that they are not in a circle, they are not in a diamond type fashion, and the world revolves, or basically the universe revolves around the sun, not the earth. So this calls into question that the church really doesn't know what they're talking about. And in fact, that calls into question what else do they know what they're talking about. So many people are frightened about the concept, like, do you really know where or how to get to heaven? What else are you not saying? So this throws this complete idea up in the air, and a lot of wealthy individuals, and eventually some of the rest of the society in Western civilization, has to discover how this whole thing works. And what this eventually does is more and more scientists are going to discover and try to involve themselves with other sciences. They are going to investigate the universe and the world around them to determine a conclusion. You have the evolution basically of the scientific method. Here's a question I want to answer. There's evidence around the world. I'm going to find it. And then we will come to some sort of conclusion when we find that evidence. So they're basing a lot of different things on evidence rather than on what they read in a book, for example, from the ancient Greeks or Romans. This is going to be where you get, for example, advances in medicine, where they're going to do autopsies and figure out where organs actually are. They were using a book written by an ancient Roman, which was several hundred years old at this point. But the problem with that was doing autopsies on corpses was blasphemy, basically. It wasn't looked on as a good thing. You were ruining the corpse and potentially desecrating that corpse, and of course a lot of bad things could happen from that point. So they, through these sciences, they started figuring out where the lungs were, where the heart was, and the intestines, and so on, and that's going to eventually advance science to the point where we can do surgeries. Because now we know exactly where all these organs are and what the problems are. So you have certainly doctors coming out of this age as well. But the most significant impact is going to be the church is going to lose its power. During the medieval period, the church was the most powerful institution in Western civilization. They could basically control kings if they wanted to. But now with this hole in what the church is saying, the nobles and kings and the rest of society is going to be very suspicious of what the church is actually saying. And so as a result, their power is going to wane. Pope is not going to basically tell all the kings what's going on. They're going to do A, B, and C. Instead, the Pope is going to be the leader of the church. He is going to influence the Christian church. And that's pretty much it. It's basically what you see today. They can influence certainly the congregation of the Roman Catholic Church, but you're not seeing popes declaring war and having the European armies go and fight this war like you would see in the Crusades. And so now you have a shift of power from being certainly the religious leaders to now the kings and the lords and wealthy citizens are actually going to be the ones with the most influence. And certainly people are going to hold more regard for basically people trying to use science to better their lives with physical and quick inventions. Um, they are they certainly could go to church and they could pray and maybe something would happen. But at the same time, they could maybe use science and eventually machines in the 1700s to fix the problem for them, to make farming easier, to make their lives easier. Now, many people still believed in God, being Christian or Jew or any of these other different religions that are widespread around Europe. But it's just going to have a little reduced impact on their daily lives. So this certainly changes the scene for Europe. So that's certainly a huge impact with the advent of the scientific revolution.